Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Rich and you've turned into another episode of Wristwatch Rescue, where yours truly attempts to rescue vintage watches from the past. Now, today on my bench, I've got this Gruen Precision Wind. I love the dial on this thing. It's a starburst pattern and it's just gorgeous. Now, I picked this up at an estate sale. I was there the last few minutes and they were trying to dump everything they could, and I made them an offer, a ridiculous offer, actually, and they took it. But just first look at it, of course, the watch band has got to go. It's in useless condition. But the nice thing I found was the case, the gold on the case. This is just gold filled or gold plated. It's not worn down. Now, for a 65-year-old watch, usually the gold plating is worn off on the lugs. So that's what caught my eye also. It's a really good shape on the case. And now let's open it up and see what it looks like on the inside. I'm hoping it doesn't have a lot of rust, because being here in Florida, when a stem is not in a watch, the humidity gets in there and rusts a lot of parts. So it just depends on how well it was kept, or stored, I should say. Well, the good news is there's no rust on the inside. So we should be in pretty good shape. Now, this auto wind pendant that winds the watch as you move your arm, it's barely moving. Something is dragging on it on the bottom. So we're going to have to take it apart, give it a service, put it to a cleaning process, put it back together, lubricate it, and then we'll see how well it runs. And hopefully it runs really good. Now, to get started, I need to take the hands off of the dial. Now, use that piece of plastic that you see there to keep from scratching this beautiful starburst dial. I can't quit talking about it because I love starburst dials. Now, I'm using this special little wooden tweezers so they don't scratch that dial at all and don't damage the hands as I move it around. Now, there's a couple of screws to get this dial off. Just about 4 or 5 turns, and it'll loosen it up, one on each side. And then I can just slip my little orange flat end of my orange stick there, pop that dial off. It looks like it's in really good shape. Now I'm going to put it in a little box with the hands, which is specially made just for dials. It's called a dial box. And we'll put that away so it stays safe. Now let's take a look at this auto winder. Yeah, you can see the screw missing there on the balance wheel. Now, as I started to take the winding mechanism off of the top of the watch here, these blue screws that were holding it down, 2 of them were very, very loose. So that's possibly why that counterweight was dragging, because they weren't tightened down. So obviously somebody got in this watch and tried to service it, but it didn't go well because they forgot to put the screws tighten up, and also forgot to put the screw in, or lost the screw to the balance wheel, which we're going to have to find a new one for. Watches like this are part of the reason I got into the hobby of watchmaking. To me, it's fun to find watches at flea markets and estate sales. I can rescue them from the bone pile and bring them back to life so that they can be enjoyed for years to come. Now, the history of the Gruen Watch Company is kind of unique. It started with a guy by the name of Dietrich Gruen, who was a German immigrant. He was trained in the watch industry in Germany, and he came to Ohio in the 1870s. He formed a little company called the Columbus Watch Manufacturers in Columbus, Ohio, and then he later formed another company called Gruen Watches with his son. And by 1894, they were making their own watches. But what's unique about the company is he had his connections with the German manufacturers, and he imported a lot of the movements from Germany and put them in, and then reassembled them in the America, and sold them in America. Then later on, after the turn of the century, he actually opened another factory in Switzerland where he turned out more precision watches. That's why, hence the name Precision, why this one has precision on the dial. And then he imported those and sold them at a higher price than the ones he built in Columbus, Ohio. Then he got into wristwatches before World War I, when most people were still buying pocket watches. And usually ladies were catered to the ladies before World War I. But then after the war, the men all saw them and wore them in the war, and they started buying them in the 1920s. Now, he actually died in 1917, but in the 1920s and the 1930s, his sons led the company, and they came out with a watch called the Curvex, which was the first watch that actually was curved to fit your wrist. It was quite a unique design. It was very popular and a very high-end watch in its day. And then after World War II, when the American watch market started to fall apart, they broke the company up in the 1950s and eventually sold it off. By 1958, the entire company was gone, but the name lived on. There was a company in New York and in Switzerland that used the name, and they basically built all the watches in Switzerland and then imported them under the Gruen name. And that's where this watch actually was built, in Switzerland, because it was built in 1960. So it wasn't really built in America. My first watch as a child in the 1960s was actually a Gruen, and I always thought it was an American-made watch. And most people back in the 1960s thought Gruen was still an American company, but it wasn't. Everything was made in Switzerland. Now, this watch is actually a caliber 710. Came out in 1960. It has two complications. It has the date and the auto wind complication. And what I mean by complications is whenever you take a standard watch, it just tells time, and then you add things like the date or the day or the self-winding or some other stuff like that, they call that complications. Now, a lot of people don't realize that Gruen and Rolex use the same manufacturing facilities. It was a third party in Switzerland back in the 1930s and into the 1940s. So a lot of the movements in Rolexes were identical to the movements in a Gruen. And eventually, after Gruen dissolved, Rolex ended up buying out that company, that third-party company, and actually uses the building that Gruen used to build the watches in for today. I'm taking apart the motion works at this time. Now that's the what's called the minute wheel. Now the next part of the motion works is the cannon pinion that I'm using this little special tool to take off. It just pops it off. It's pressure fitted. Now the cannon pinion actually connects to that minute wheel, and then also the intermediate wheel. And what the motion works does, that's what lets you move the time on the watch. This is a setting lever spring. Now what it does is it covers up the yoke and the yoke spring that I'm taking out here. But the spring also pushes up against the setting lever and gives you that click when you pull the crown out. Now I've rolled the watch over and I'm loosening the setting lever itself, and see how it fell out. Now that's the part that presses against that setting lever spring. Now I'm going to put it back over so I can finish taking the yoke out. Now the yoke is actually what pushes against the sliding pinion. And the sliding pinion actually engages with the clutch. So when you turn the crown, the clutch will actually wind the watch. Then as you pull it out, that sliding pinion is pushed forward and you turn the crown and you can sit the hands on the watch. The pallet fork bridge is the next thing to come out. Now once I raise up the bridge, you can see the pallet fork and see how it's engaged in there with the escapement wheel. Now it's got its own two little pivots. Now it looks like it's in pretty good shape, so we shouldn't have any trouble there. We're just going to clean it. Now I want to get the train of wheels bridge off. This guy has, let's see, this one has 4 screws. And once all the screws are out, I just gently pry this up. Nice and easy, because I don't want to disturb the pivots underneath. As I turn that main bridge over, you can actually see the crown wheel. That's where my tip of my tweezers is touching, and then to the right of that is the click. Now, the way this works, and the reason they call it a train of wheels, is the mainspring over on the right. That's the big silver wheel. Actually, as it unwinds its spring, it sends the power down the line, kind of like a train. It just takes it all down the track. And eventually it ends up in the escapement wheel there, the one with the funny looking teeth. And that actually engages with that pallet fork. And that's what gives you the tick and the tock in your watch. The power is slowly released back and forth at the pallet fork and the escapement wheel. So we're going to take that mainspring apart. Now, this guy actually has a little sub-bridge underneath for this center wheel. As you can see, as I pull it up, it's only covering that center wheel. And now when I pull that center wheel out, you'll notice this is the actual part that the cannon pinion attaches to on the other side of the watch. So that actually turns the hour hand. Now that part of the watch is completely disassembled. Next, I'm going to take out the mainspring and give it a cleaning. Easy. Oh, well, that spring went off into the wild, and here it is. I did find it. Here's all the parts laid out, including the new crown and the new screw for the balance wheel bridge. I'm going to put them through the cleaning machine. It's a 3-step process. First is a wash, then 2 rinses, and then you dry it in that hole there on the right. For those of you that enjoy what I do here, I've started a Patreon page. Now, Patreon is a way for you to support your favorite video content creators or artists or anybody that has a website. I'll put a link down below, but basically there's 3 levels, and you can pick what you want to give on a monthly basis. It starts at $4 and goes up from there. Now, after everything's been cleaned, I'm going to start by oiling the mainspring because it was very filthy, and after 65 years it could use a little lubrication. What I've done is put a little 8200 lube on that piece of paper and slid it down the mainspring. Next, I put it on the mainspring winder and used my little mainspring winding tool here. Now, I get a lot of people asking in the comments what brand of mainspring winder this is. All it says on it is Germany. It's about 80 years old, I got a feeling. But I can't tell you other than that. So I just watch for it on eBay every once in a while. One will come up. Usually it's a fellow from over in Poland that is selling them. But once you get the mainspring into the barrel, now this guy here does not have the arbor is part of the lid. So that's why you didn't see me put in a separate arbor. Now I'm going to put a little bit of oil, 8200, on the top of that arbor. And then I'm going to start with the center wheel. It is actually the wheel that turns once an hour. In other words, turns the hour hand on the other side of the watch. It's the first wheel that takes the power from the mainspring and then sends it on down the train of wheels to the next one. This little intermediate bridge keeps it nice and straight, keeps everything moving smoothly. I put a little 9010 oil on that pivot and that jewel. And I also put some 8200 over here on the bridge where the barrel is going to set. Now I'm just dropping in the mainspring barrel into that hole, and as you can see how it will unwind slowly and turn that wheel once an hour. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to put in the escapement wheel. And like I said, that's the last wheel in the train. Now, this is the third wheel. It will actually take the power from that center wheel and bring it over to the next wheel, which is actually your seconds wheel that turns the seconds hand on the face of the watch. Just putting a little 9010, that's Mobius oil. Now this has a jewel, so it'll move nice and smoothly. Now it's time to put the train of wheels bridge back over all of these wheels. Now, this is where it's a tricky part. This is actually the trickiest part of putting a watch back together, is getting all those pivots into their jewels. You want to go very slow when you do this. Now, what I like to do is take a couple of the bridge screws and just slightly start them with the threads, but not tight at all. Now you can see it moving. I've got it where it needs to be. All of the wheels are spinning nicely, as you can see. Now the reason they're spinning freely here is I haven't put the pallet fork in yet. So that's going to be the next order of business, is getting the pallet fork in there. But before I do that, I don't want to risk damaging it while I'm working on the other side. So I've flipped the watch back over. I'm going to start with the cannon pinion. Now that's attaching to that center wheel that came all the way through. Now here is the sliding pinion that I'm putting the blue grease. Now the blue grease is a heavier kind of grease. It's going to last a lot longer. It's for high friction parts. So that's why I'm using it on the keyless works here. So when the clutch and that sliding pinion come together, they're going to not tear each other up. And I'm putting some of this blue grease on this new stem and crown that I got off of a donor watch. Just want to make sure every thing turns. Now I've got that intermediate wheel in there because that sliding pinion engages with that intermediate wheel. Then I drop the yoke on top. And now before I put that yoke spring in, I want to put the setting lever back in. Now the setting lever has a little tongue that goes down and engages with the stem. So what I did is I flipped the watch over and I tightened that down. You can see it moving now because that little tab is in the slot of the stem on the crown stem. Now the tricky part, putting this powerful little yoke spring back in. I'm using two. You see I hold down the one end in case that gets loose, it doesn't go flying. And then what I like to do is put the setting lever spring on as quickly as I can so that that spring has no chance of going up into orbit. Now that little tongue on that spring is engaging with a little notch on top of that setting lever. So when you pull the stem out, you see how it's going friction against that little tongue on the setting lever spring. Now let's put a little bit of oil on the rest of the MotionWorks stems. And this is the minute wheel. Now the minute wheel has its own little cover plate. Now that's the end of the MotionWorks until I get to the hour wheel. Now this is the date wheel. Now this is kind of an interesting little intermediate wheel between the date wheel, and that top of that intermediate wheel will engage with the hour wheel. But before it can do that, I have to put this little sliding holder in there with a little one screw, and it just keeps that wheel from falling out. Now, as you can see, as I turn this, that's going to turn. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to put on the date wheel. Just lay it in there. Now, it has a couple of retaining plates. This one over here is pretty simple. These two screws hold it down. And what it does is it just keeps that date wheel from coming up and keeps it in its track. Now on the other side, there's a little lever that's going to have a spring. You can see how it goes into those teeth? That's what actually keeps it aligned when it flips over. And then I'm going to put this little spring that pushes up against. So that little tongue is going to push against that wheel with that spring. And then here again, a very similar plate as the other side is going to keep all of that from coming apart. Now, the hour wheel goes on, but before I put the dial on, I've got to get this watch running. So we're going to put in the pallet fork. Now it sits in that one little jewel. We've got to align it, and then the other the two jewels on the end of the pallet fork. There you go. You see how they kind of fit in between the escapement teeth? And we'll get the bridge on. Very gently, because you just don't want to tear up a pallet here. A pivot on the pallet fork. Easy. There we go. Now, there we go. Now, I'm not tightening this down all the way. I'm going to wind the watch up. And I just want to make sure everything's going to work before I tighten it down. Now, you can see when I touch the pallet fork, see how it just kind of jumps on its own? That's because the power from the mainspring is coming all the way down that train of wheels and going into that pallet fork. So that's what causes it to actually work. The power pushes that pallet fork back and forth, which in turn makes the watch run. Now, here's the moment of truth. I love this part of putting the watch back together. We're going to see if the balance will work. Because remember, this watch was not running when we started. So I have no idea if it's going to run like a top or be a dud. Let's see. I just got to get everything in its pivots, nice and easy. There we go. Oh, not yet, not yet. There. Oh, it's taken off. Oh, it looks good. It's good aptitude. In other words, there's a lot of power coming through. I was able to source a new screw for the balance wheel bridge. So now we've got all the missing parts back in place. And we'll give this a nice snug fit and check it out, make sure it's still running. To make sure that the watch is going to run smoothly, I'm going to put oil on the jewels on the balance. Now what I'm going to do is gently raise this little brass spring up. I've got this under the microscope. And take off the crown jewel. And then take off the bottom part of the jewel. Get it out of the hole. Now you can see that balance bouncing around inside that hole. It's very violent the way it moves. Now here's after I've washed it, this is the actual jewel. I'm going to put a tiny little bit of oil on there and then set the bottom part back on there. And they'll stick together because of the capillary action on that. Then I'm going to drop it back into the jewel hole and then gently move that spring down. And I want to hold it so it doesn't fly off. Now I'm using a little stick. It's like an oiling stick that broke off. And then slide it in. And, oh, see how it slides under there? Very delicate work. Now we're going to put in the automatic winding mechanism. Now this one's got a lot of pieces and parts to it. First, I've got to put this little spring that's going to push that little wheel to the left there. That wheel helps the automatic winding mechanism disengage when you turn the crown and wind it manually. So what it does is that little gear moves over and out of the way so that that other wheel on the left can turn as you wind it up. Now it's got its own little cover plate. Next, I'm going to lubricate the post. Now this is the post that the click will sit on, and then this is the one that other brass wheel will sit on. Now this is kind of an unusual self-winding mechanism. It actually has a click. Now this is one of the reversing wheels. So that click is going to actually stop that reversing wheel. And here's the other reversing wheel. So what's going to happen is they're going to engage with this large brass wheel here. And then that one is actually going to engage with that one over there too. So we're going to set them in place and you'll get an idea of what's going on here. See how it turns? Now, depending on which way the counterweight swings, one of those wheels will swing one way or the other way. Now, putting on the click spring just to keep it from coming apart. And then this is a little floating gear. And this is kind of the secret part of this winding mechanism, because when it's going one way, that wheel will jump to the left, and when it's going the other way, it'll jump back to the right. Now you can see there's a little slot in that cover plate that sliding wheel goes into. And then there's pivots for all these other wheels too. I just got to get them all lined up. There we go. Oh, not yet. Okay, now we can get it screwed down. And you can see how these wheels are going to move. So when I push one way, the wheel goes one way. When I push the other way, it still goes the same way. So it's a reversing mechanism. So we'll just get it tightened down. Now here's that counterbalance. Now we're going to put this mounting plate on first. And then I'm going to put a little bit of 8200 oil in there. And then put this little plate underneath that mounts to the other mounting bracket. And then we're going to flip it over. And hopefully it'll stay together. Yes, it does. And we'll just put it in this slot on top of the winding mechanism. Now there's those three blued screws that hold this thing tight. We're going to get them nice and tight, because that was part of our problem when we took the watch apart, was those screws weren't tight, and that weight was dragging as it spun around. Now my counterbalance is moving very, very easily. You can see the wheels underneath turning, and it's moving freely. That's exactly what we want to see. Now it's time to put the dial back on. First I have to put the hour wheel on, and that's the part that will engage with the hour hand on the dial. And I gently set it down there, get those feet in the holes, tighten them up. There we go. Now, time to put the hour hand on. Now, I've run the watch around so that it just turned the date. So at midnight, I want to, when you're doing a date dial or watch, you need to have the hands set at 12 right after it clicks over. So here's my minute hand. Line it up perfectly. Use my little tool to press them down on there. Make sure everything clears. That's what I'm doing there. And then I'm going to put on the seconds hand, and we'll see how it looks. Just gently tap it. Oh, it looks good. It's running good. I'm just going to give it a little pressure to make sure it stays on. And away we go. Here again, I want to make sure it clears the hands. Now, what I'm doing here is getting ready to recase it, but this case had a lot of arm cheese on it. So I'm cleaning it off with a pegwood before I put it in the ultrasonic. With the pieces out of the ultrasonic cleaner, I can polish this gold up because it's going to look really, really nice when it's done. And it's starting to shine already. Just a little bit of polish. I don't want to put it on a buffer because that could buff some of the gold off. Now, I did get a new crystal, and I'm going to put that on. And I'm going to use this little thing called crystal press. Now, first I have to find a die for the top. Kind of snug. It kind of fits the outside, and then it'll push down, and I'm going to screw it to the top of the crystal press. And then I'm going to find another die that'll go up through the bottom of the case. Okay, it has to be smaller than the case. So I'll put that on the bottom. Then I put the case down over it, put the crystal on top, put that piece of plastic in there to keep from scratching the crystal. Then I'm going to gently put some pressure by turning that knob and pushing down on the crystal. It's going to bend it ever so slightly, just enough for it to fit inside of the case that's sitting down below. Then once I get the crystal bent, I have to pick up the case and hold it there. Yeah, well, easier said than done. And then once it's holding, I'm going to loosen it, and that'll release the pressure on the crystal, and it'll expand into the groove. Kind of an ingenious way of doing things. And so now you have a brand new crystal. So now it's time to put the watch into the case. First, I'm going to blow it off, make sure everything's working one more time, take that new stem out, put my new shiny case with a new crystal on top, gently flip it over, and then I'll get the stem back in there. And there's a case ring, movement holder, I should call it. And that just keeps the whole movement from rattling around inside the case. It just kind of snug fit. Now this guy has that dust cover, which will keep a lot of the moisture and a lot of the dirt out of the movement. Then I'm going to put the back on. I'm just going to slightly tighten it with my stick before I tighten it with the 8-ball. The 8-ball is made of rubber, and it just grabs that back and tightens it down really well. So everything's moving right, and it looks really, really pretty. I love that starburst. Now it's time to put it on the time grapher. We've got a pretty good reading. We've got 2 seconds a day for a 65-year-old watch, pretty darn good. 250 amplitude, and a beat error under 1. Totally acceptable. Now I'm going to put a nice leather strap on this. This watch turned out gorgeous. I can't wait to put this on my wrist. So as always, I'm very appreciative of you coming along and watching what I do, and I will see you on the next one.